And so then we thought, wow, what if we can replace the most unsustainable form of food agriculture, being animals, with the most sustainable form of food agriculture, being kelp? So with the next product, it is the Kelp Burger, and it is so delicious. We've gotten just the best feedback on this burger, which feels really good.
Hello, friends, and welcome to Impact Everywhere, the podcast that looks for people having a positive impact in unexpected places. Our guest today is Courtney Boyd Myers, and she is the founder of AKUA. That's spelled AKUA. In April 2019, she launched her first product, which was a kelp jerky, and most recently decided to pivot into kelp hamburgers during the pandemic. I'm sure some of you might be wondering, well, what does kelp have to do with impact anyways? And that's where things get interesting and what we're actually going to be talking about. Courtney has a background in both journalism and community building. She started off as an editor for The Next Web, covering New York City startups and digital innovation, and over time became the global community director at Summit, which is a community and events company that brings together top innovators and creatives, and most recently made the pivot into kelp. As with most of the guests that come on this podcast, her journey is anything but linear, and that's what we like, because it is the experiences that we had in our past that give us the potential to create change in the present. Anyways, this is Courtney, ladies and gentlemen, and I have just asked her, what is so magical about kelp?
Kelp is truly a magical sea vegetable. I think that the elements of why it's so magical, to me at least, are rooted in personal nutrition. So it's just full of so many vitamins and minerals. And of course, the climate change impact. You can grow kelp in an ocean farm environment, and it doesn't require fresh water or dry land or fertilizer or feed to grow, which when you think about a growing population and how do we feed the planet with as minimal impact on the earth as possible, it becomes really exciting to think about kelp. If you were to plant a rainforest underwater, the kelp is sequestering carbon and nitrogen from the sea as it grows. I think lastly is we haven't even explored seaweed and algae really as a food source in the Western world. Meanwhile, in a lot of Asian cultures, they've been eating it as part of their diet for thousands of years. So I think that kind of undiscovered, a whole new territory around food is pretty magical too.
Yeah, it's the ultimate superfood. Not only is kelp super healthy, but I think I also read somewhere that it's so good at sequestering carbon to the point where you guys called yourself a carbon negative company. I'm curious, how do you guys calculate something like that?
Yeah, so we don't say carbon negative company because at the end of the day, it is very hard to be carbon negative because you're just walking in the world and transporting products. But we do call kelp a carbon negative supply chain. There's really not many types of food that you can say are actually carbon negative. Most of them require resources to be grown. Kelp is really special in that way. And then once we take the kelp out of the water and we bring it to our facility and we mix it with all the other ingredients, we start to lose that carbon negative stamp. But we're definitely more leaning towards carbon negative, carbon neutrality than most other food companies out there.
Got it. I must have misread that somewhere then. You don't really have a background as a kelp farmer. Could you share with us what your journey was into this wonderful world of kelp?
Yeah, definitely not a background in kelp farming. I was like a startup kid and I was running around interviewing folks who were creating companies like Instagram and WeWork. And I just thought I was going to be a robot one day and I couldn't wait for the AI revolution. And I just turned a corner on 30 real hard and started thinking very seriously about climate change. What I was drawn to in terms of the myriad of solutions to climate change was actually not rooted in traditional tech and startup technology. It was in food. And I think part of that is my father worked in food for a long time. I married a guy who worked in food. So it brings me great pleasure also as someone who's a true community builder and host to create a company that I can physically give someone something from that I've created.
And what have you learned moving between the startup world and the food world? Like, what have been the greatest challenges or the biggest differences?
I think that in the startup tech world, there's just this incredible amount of forward momentum and an incredible sense of potential to scale very quickly. You can go to bed one night with 1,000 users and wake up in the morning and 1 billion people have taken your site down because of an article in TechCrunch. And I think that the potential for scale with food takes a lot longer. You have physical systems that, whether it's growing the food or it's making the food, that can't just pace with software. And then meanwhile, you have an industry that is, for all of its good points, it's a little antiquated. You have people who are really expecting paper PDF printouts when you're pitching them. And it's a lot of industry people who, are maybe not forward thinking the way things used to be, and rushing in as this like tech kid and butting up against that and having to learn my place in the system. As just someone who's also new to a network, I was the cool kid in tech and no one's heard of me in food. Yeah, there's definitely been a little bit of grading there.
But despite the challenges of shifting from tech to food, one of the things that I've been particularly impressed by as I was doing my research and homework is the amount of community values that you have built into your platform. One of the examples that I just really love is the Salt Sisters as a kelp supplier for your food supply chain. Could you share with us a little bit more about that?
Oh yeah, love the Salt Sisters. Okay, so when we first started building out the supply chain around AKUA, we were dealing with a lot of grizzly fishermen. And we had one fisherman, kelp farmer, who stole another person's boat. And it was all of these, kind of men with egos. And this new industry, there's a lot of power to grab when there's a new, really promising industry that's getting a lot of marketing and PR the way kelp farming does. And so when I found this group of women who were kelp farming, who were just so wicked to work with, I was like, this is amazing. I want to scale with this group of women for the foreseeable future. So the Salt Sisters, they're called Summit Point Seafood. And Colleen Frank is the founder of Salt Sisters. And she went through a bout of alcoholism, and in coming out as part of her recovery process, found ocean farming and started the Salt Sisters to attract other women who were coming out of recovery and to get them out on the boats, salt in their hair, and to be kelp farming and to have that community. They have one of the biggest farms in Maine. They grow more kelp than we even know what to do with. So they're really awesome. And I hope to someday grow faster than they do and to just buy all of their kelp and more. But yeah, they're great partners.
Oh, that's so wonderful. There are so many things to think about as you're starting a company, between like supply chain, how sustainable things are supposed to be, who your distribution partners are, what kind of packaging you use. There are so many different parts, especially for a first-time entrepreneur. How did you make sure that things stayed ethical and sustainable every step of the way without deviating from your values and building a profitable business at the same time?
Yeah, Ben, I think that's a daily process. Every single day as a founder of a sustainable company, period, you have to make choices. And so much of what I think is like this big white elephant in the room of the better for you food industry is that these products are not necessarily better for the planet. And the packaging that they're in is certainly not better for the planet. This is this really frustrating dynamic for a lot of founders who really care. And they're like, okay, what can I put my product in that's going to have as least amount of impact on the planet as possible? Specifically, you and I met in an ocean impact accelerator, and ocean plastics are just, enough to make you want to cry yourself to bed every night. And here I am putting kelp jerky into plastic containers. So it's really hard. We decided on recyclable plastic for our first packaging choice. And we were about to switch to compostable, and then our supply chain was pretty much wiped out in the pandemic, and the company shut down that specific line. So we're looking now to switching to compostable in the new year. And even compostable packaging has its ups and downs in terms of how to get rid of it successfully. And then you have biodegradable food packaging, which doesn't totally make sense because your shelf life gets cut almost by 50% at least. We have these compostable mailers that we started using, and a customer sent us a photo, and the compostable mailer had ripped and disintegrated in shipment. And so UPS had to put like a big bubble plastic mailer like over the package. And it was like such a painful image to see, because you could tell we tried and that we failed. And so much of this is because the companies like ours, but even more importantly, bigger companies, are not demanding better materials from these packaging companies. So they're not investing money into the R&D for better packaging. And that's that cycle we really have to break. And it starts with the consumer demanding it. So I thank every consumer that bitches on Instagram about the fact that we're in recyclable plastic packaging and not compostable. I want more and more consumers to be demanding that from the bigger companies too, because this is a total industry-wide systemic issue that everyone needs to be rowing in the same direction on.
Got it. So you're really just trying to raise the questions and do the best that you can along the way. I feel like that's the story of every modern day person trying to navigate the world and be the best human being they possibly can be.
Definitely. There's a great quote by the Patagonia founder that's just like, when you create a company, like there's no such thing as a benign situation. It's just like creating less harm in the world. And so I think about that all the time at AKUA. And I hope that even though we're creating new things in the world, with every package someone buys and flips it and reads our story, that thought process, that shift that happens around, well, what does it mean to eat sustainably? Like actually start questioning all of their food choices, and potentially that impact outweighs any of the impact that might be caused from shipping kelp jerky from Portland, Maine to LA.
So true, so true. Recently, you've started shifting away from kelp jerky to something brand new and more exciting. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, of course. I know, I think to borrow a tech term, it is a little bit of a pivot for us, or you could look at it as just the next product in our extension. But the pivot really is because we've been trying to figure out how to get more Americans eating kelp since day one. And we did R&D around tons of different recipes. We had this amazing one called Kelpo noodles. So like cupo noodles, but with kelp. And it was the recipes for jerky, burgers, and sausages that really did very well in the early R&D days. And so then we thought, wow, what if we can replace the most unsustainable form of food agriculture, being animals, with the most sustainable form of food agriculture, being kelp? So with the next product, it is the Kelp Burger. And it is so delicious. We've gotten just the best feedback on this burger, which feels really good. The jerky can be a little polarizing for people. It's very healthy. It's very kelpy. But the burger's just hands down, everybody keeps saying this is the best vegan burger I've ever had. So we're very excited to bring it to market. We've been secretly selling it. So if anyone listening wants to try it, you can DM us on Instagram and we'll send you the secret link.
I love that secret link idea as a marketing tactic. Seems genius. The out burger market is a really saturated space. We have the massive players like Beyond and Impossible, and there are a zillion smaller players. Tell us what is different about this Kelp Burger besides the fact that it's made of kelp.
You know, in building a business, pitching investors is just unfortunately a big part of it. And no one is ever like, oh my God, this is exactly the right size market you should be going into. They're either like, ooh, vegan jerky, that's got to be too small. And then they're like, oh, vegan burgers, ooh, but it's too saturated, too big. And so it is very hard to break through. But you've got to look at some of the biggest companies that have had these monster exits and built these unbelievable brands over the past 10 years. They haven't been incredibly innovative small markets. They've been like, ice cream. And they've been like new protein bars. These are like the most saturated markets you can think of going into. And yet we still see these almost billion-dollar companies coming out of it. So it doesn't scare me that there's a lot of burgers out there. It's actually very reassuring that there's a lot of burgers out there versus a lot of like vegan jerky companies, which there are only a few. So with the landscape, which I look at the spectrum of like fake meat, that's Beyond and Impossible. And then eventually there will be like lab grown meat on the, that far end of the spectrum, which is super cool, but also very expensive and costly to do. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you have these boring vegan patties of our, previous generation, like Boga burgers. And I really think that a kelp burger kind of sits in between them. And the reason being is it's definitely more of a whole foods burger. It's definitely a lot more interesting and satiating than any vegan burger on the market. It has a really complex, rich texture and taste because of the umami profile of mushrooms and kelp. And we're the only business producing burgers made from those two ingredients as of today. And so I think that these two ingredients are really our superpower, is like the glutamate, and which creates glutamic acid. It's satiating in a way that meat is. Yet we don't need to use chemicals like cultured dextrose and methylcellulose to get it to all gel together and have you think that you're eating a cow.
Oh, interesting. So you're not really trying to emulate any kind of texture in particular. You're really just trying to create something that's healthy and tasty. Is that correct? Or
It does mimic the texture of a burger. It's pretty meaty, but the taste profile, you're not going to say, oh, wow, is this a cow or is it kelp? You're definitely going to know it's vegetarian. And I think there's a lot of people out there who have been turned on to the plant-based burger movement through Impossible and Beyond, but are starting to say, oh, I don't think this is actually something I should be eating every day. That's a lot of ingredients that I can't pronounce. Maybe I shouldn't be feeding this to my kids. And so what's like the satiating, delicious option out there for them that's not just like a boring veggie burger?
So in theory, we can eat your kelp burger every single day. And what you're saying is that it would be like eating a salad. Is that right?
Yeah, I joke that nutritionally it is like eating a salad, but it's obviously way more fun and delicious. Yes, you can eat the kelp burger every single day. It's really an amazing product. And you can do a lot with it too. Like we've misshapen it and then we've made it into like kelp bolognese and kelp burger tacos, and we're taking it into little shapes and baking it and making kelp nuggets. So yeah, it's very versatile.
And one of the other things that's really interesting about this kelp burger is the way you're fundraising for it. You're using a platform called Republic. What is it and why is it special?
Yeah, of course. So Republic is a equity crowdfunding platform. So different than rewards crowdfunding where you go in like Kickstarter and put $100 in and 3 months later you'll get like a robot toast maker. And so with the equity crowdfunding, you put in $100 and you're actually an investor in AKUA at that point. If you were to go on fidelity.com or public.com and buy $100 and you would be an investor in Amazon. Very small. You can get more of AKUA today than you can get of Amazon for $100. So we love this idea of building AKUA with a tribe of people. Looking at 2020, we were fundraising for AKUA to bring our kelp burger to market, and it was becoming really hard to ask people for money in the middle of pandemic season. So that's when Republic approached us and they said, we have seen unbelievable growth on our platform during the pandemic. It's really interesting. We think you would do really well. And we started to explore it. And I think as a true community builder, I love the idea of rallying people around a business idea like the Kelp Burger. So we launched it a couple weeks ago. We just passed like the 150K mark. And I'm literally brought to tears like most days of people who are like putting in $300 and then they're like, can I help you with this? Can I help you with this? We're building an army. It's an amazing feeling. I really love equity crowdfunding. I think that we're going to definitely see more and more companies raising money in this way in the months to come.
Nice. So you're trying to create stakeholders, like real stakeholders in your company who are also fans and followers and users all at the same time.
Exactly. We had this one woman who is a Kickstarter backer, and she's the kind of customer that every single time we run a sale, she spends like $300. She's just like waiting for that sale and like stocks up. And so she went in and put $600 into our company, which I don't know her personally, but that's a lot of money for most everyone. And she was like, I just believe in this company. I want you to succeed. I'm so proud to be an investor. And it was like, that $600 means so much more to me than some VC whose job it is to invest in companies all day long and who gives us 50K. Like that woman, she's family now. It's an amazing feeling.
That's super cool. But there's still a risk associated with this, right? Like, how do you explain the risk to people who have less experience investing?
It's definitely a risk to put money into a company that could fail. That isn't, I would say you could put money into a public company and it goes down to zero. Like we saw the company Nikola today lost a contract with GM and slid down over 30%. That's crazy. Investing in general is risky. And I think investing in an early stage company is definitely has different kinds of risks. But what's cool about Republic is your risk can be as little as $100 and your upside can be much bigger than, like I said, putting $100 into Amazon.
Got it. I still love it because otherwise you have to be an accredited investor in order to invest in a company that you believe in, which really limits the pool of who can actually invest in something that they believe in. And in so many ways, the rich get richer. And so I quite like this idea of an equity crowdfunding model that you've opened up to your community. Speaking of community, you have a really amazing network. Richard Branson was one of your testimonials for the AKUA launch. I want to ask you, how important is networking to you, and what advice would you give to somebody who's looking to build their network?
I don't want to say this too loudly with my husband behind me, but I was in my 20s and I dated a much older man at one point. And I'll never forget like the advice he gave me around networking, which can be a kind of ugly word because it can be cross-referenced with someone who's like a social climber. But that's not what networking is to me at all. And the way he described it is he said it's like a fisherman working the net and getting more and more fish into the net. And at the end of the day, if you're going to be able to eat those fish, the other way to look at it is you're building a net. And if you fall, you're going to have that net to fall back on. And so throughout my 20s, I collected as many amazing people as I could all around the world. And I've been able to live a very global life. I can drop into Berlin and through contacts on Facebook or Instagram, I could have dinner that night with 15 people who are part of my network and name a city in the world. And I could easily, if not from 1 degree, at least from 2nd degree, find friends there. And I think that's, for me, one of the most important parts of networking is being able to travel throughout the world and have it feel like home wherever you go. And then obviously with business, it's amazing to have a huge network. We had an article in Fast Company that came out today about the Kelp Burger, and I posted on LinkedIn, and all these people reposted it and liked it. And like, that's amazing. And they do that because when they post, I repost it and I liked it and I share it everywhere. And it creates this really virtuous cycle of peer support, which when you're growing a business is vital.
Nice. So basically your advice for building a network is simply to be helpful and useful to others, which is a wonderful thing to do. You use the word community to describe what you're trying to build at AKUA. What kind of community values did you have in mind when you launched your first Kickstarter campaign, and how did you imbue them inside of the campaign when you launched it?
Yep. So we were looking for people to be a part of the AKUA tribe and AKUA community who had woken up to the fact that the way we make food today at scale is not healthy for us as humans, and it's not healthy for us as earthlings and the planet. So we were looking for people who are curious, who are questioning, who are looking for better, more sustainable options to bring into their homes, throw into their backpacks as they travel the world. And I think that for a huge part of our community too is around loving the oceans. It's around, wow, we can create food from the ocean that's good for the ocean, that creates revenue streams for fishermen so they don't need to fish as much. The whole thing, it's really getting at that inner, I want to be a mermaid mentality. That's definitely a big part of our community.
Got it. So basically finding like-minded people. I have a question for you about investing. I think many investors often look for technical founders, not, say, a community expertise-based funder. What kind of unique advantage do you think being a community builder has given you in this chapter of your journey?
I think building as a founder who has an ability to make friends easily means that I can wake up this morning and not understand how my emails are going out now that we have 2 separate fulfillment centers, and I can email like one of the top food founders in the US and he's getting on a call with me for 45 minutes tomorrow because like he's a friend and I'm shipping him Kelp Burgers to thank him. And I think when you have a big network and you're able to make friends easily, problem solving, which is like your number one job as a company founder, becomes a lot easier. When I started AKUA, I wasn't sure what I was doing. And I started a Facebook group called OMG CPG. And it just added like 100 CPG founders in there. And now it's over 1,500 founders of food companies. And anyone has a question, is mundane as compostable packaging or as important as fundraising? It just goes in there and people are just crowdsourcing answers and helping each other. And because I'm the founder of that community, when I ask a question in it, I get answers really fast. And I think that's a really powerful tool to have. And I think if investors don't see community building as a powerful tool, then they're probably not a very good investor.
Is that how you found your initial food scientist? Because I'm just really curious to understand how someone who has no experience making food in the past suddenly come out guns blazing, making a new thing out of an ingredient that hasn't been used in this way before.
Yeah, it's a long road. It's filled with many people who are no longer with us, but we worked with a chef in the East Village at first, and he was just as nerded out about kelp as I was. And so we started making products together. He couldn't take it to the next level in the manufacturer. So we started working with a food scientist who was a friend, a very good friend, and is a good friend, but also is very busy and works with a lot of food companies. And it was hard to get his full attention. And so my co-founder actually just dove in and he was like, I'm going to do this. And he's actually the opposite of me. He's not a community builder. He's one of those people, if he can't figure it out, he's just going to think about it more. He's just going to keep drilling down and doing it 1,000 times until he figures it out. And I think part of building a company is doing the work. And so we balance out each other really well. He's incredibly hardworking and takes on a lot on his own plate, where I'm also incredibly hardworking, but I'm also like constantly just being like, okay, who's smarter than me at this? I'm going to ask them the question and take the energy and time to do that. So we do approach problems very differently.
That's great. You really need that diversity of thought to be able to paint a full picture anyways. So yeah, I want to dive into your personal journey. You've had a very illustrious journey that is full of windy roads. Could you maybe just give the listeners a summary on how you got to where you are today?
Sure. I graduated college and I remember my dad saying that like the moment you open up one door, you're climbing a pyramid and less doors are going to be available to you. And that idea was really scary because it meant that at that point at graduation, I needed to choose a door to go through that was going to keep as many doors open later to me. And so I went and became a journalist because I thought, all right, well, I'll just continue my learning really and being able to interview people in whatever subject that I find fascinating. And unfortunately, when I graduated in 2007, I was assigned the beat of Bernie Madoff and like where all of his money had gone. And I was just like interviewing like crying grandmas in Florida and it was horrible. So I asked my editor, I said, can I do something more exciting? And he was like, there's this new robot that you have that cleans your house. It's called the Roomba. So why don't you write an article on the Roomba? Okay. But I interviewed this, the CEO of iRobot at the time, who was like, fucking fascinating guy. And I ended up starting to go to like singularity conferences and hanging out with a bunch of very old men who thought they were going to live forever. And so that was a trip. And then I went into tech and startups a lot more deeply. And I was living in New York in 2010 when there was really an explosion of the startup scene. Things like WeWork had started and General Assembly, and then like Instagram sold for $1 billion. And it was a very cool part of the world to be living in at the time. Moved to London, helped a lot of startups launch in London from the US. Then I moved back to the US in 2014, got a call from my best friend. He said, hey, we just bought a mountain. Do you want to come out and help us build a town and jump into a pile of love? And I was like, yeah, I want to jump into a pile of love. That sounds great. What kind of weird hippie cult is bringing me out to Utah? But I had known the Summit community. I'd been to the events and I lived out there and we built a town. And it was there that I met so many amazing people that worked in food and environment and wellness. And that's when I started getting the itch to build AKUA.
I want to go back to one thing that you said. Did the advice that your dad give you that the world is like a pyramid, did that end up actually playing out, or do you feel like it's the complete opposite in today's world?
No, I think it's definitely different now. I love my dad. I just sent him the logo we're doing and I was like, I need you to create a tagline for our company. So my dad is like really good at some things, but when it comes to doling out life advice, he can be a little more focused on like his own generation and experience, which is fair. I think I'll probably be the same to my kids. But I think you and I are, and probably most of your listeners are in this really lucky time when we can literally, for better or worse, watch what our entire network's doing on a daily basis around us, like how they're building companies in different industries. We have so much more transparency now and visibility into this. And I think that's a huge reason why we're able to go cross industry much more easily than our parents' generation. We are no longer in a career ladder setting so much. I'm sure there's people that are still stuck in the career ladder at law firms or finance or more corporate jobs. But for the most part, this new entrepreneurial community that's really been such a mark on our generation, I think we're able to move through industries really easily. And I see things more as like the monkey bars or a jungle gym that you're climbing all over. And I see careers, whatever I'm doing, as just another semester in life. And I try to learn as much as I can and enjoy it as much as I can. And I know that at some point, the AKUA chapter will be over. And I will probably do something totally different. It won't be another food company. It'll be something totally different. And how lucky are we?
And back to this idea of journalist, because So I think journalism is a really cool skill that I wish I had acquired earlier in my life, because what you're doing is you're basically creating your own school. You're finding people that you want to talk to and you want to learn from and grab the best piece of advice from them. What is a great way to find people that you want to have a conversation with, and how do you make it worth their time?
Start a podcast. You are a journalist. You get to interview whoever you want, pick their brain for an hour, and what's better than that?
Okay. But how do you know what questions to ask then?
Oh, this is the art. Cal Fussman's The Art of Questioning is a really good study to dive into. His beautiful advice, I think the first tip is the first question, you should always aim for the heart and disarm the person and make it personal, because then everything else, they're already in a vulnerable state. They'll be much better open-minded and hearted for your questions. How do you know what to ask? I think being prepared is really important. You know, if you're taking someone's time, that's literally their most valuable asset. And arguably, like, they're also getting a spot on your podcast. So it's really win-win. But your questions today are such great examples. Like, you've said it, you did research, you Googled me before. And there's so many people that just show up for things and like wing it. And it's a real skill to be able to wing interviews. I've done it. But I think, just knowing, I even do it when I get on a call with an investor. I try to spend 10 minutes before the call, even if I don't have it, digging through their LinkedIn, their mutual connections with me, their Instagram. And the more you know about a person, especially in today's when we're doing everything on Zoom and Google Hangouts, it's just so important.
Absolutely. And moving a little bit forward through your timeline into the tech startup days, what are some of the lessons that you learned in those early days that you've taken with you and continue to apply today?
I have to admit, I have a couple regrets. So I am not a extremely wealthy woman, yet I was the very first person to write about Warby Parker. I found the boys when they were in business school and hit up Neil Blumenthal and said, "Hey, can I write an article on you?" And I got some free sunglasses, but I should have definitely asked for a job. And it was the same thing. When Kevin Systrom saw on my Facebook that I had a hipstamatic profile photo, he's like, "Hey, I'm launching this company called Instagram. Was wondering if you wanted to write about our launch." And I was like, "Yeah, sure." Again, probably should have asked for a job, only would have had to work there for like a year and would have cashed out. I think in general, my journeys through startups where everything can happen really fast, failures and successes, and digging in, getting equity in certain businesses, I think I had wished I had done more of. But yeah, you live and you learn. I've got a long career ahead of me, and the lessons I have now, the best thing I can do with them is pass on to all the younger women and men that I mentor so they don't make the same mistakes.
I mean, hindsight is 2020, right? You couldn't have known at the time which were the companies that were going to succeed and which were the ones that were going to fail. Things could have ended up even worse than where they are today.
By the way, I think we need to change hindsight is 2020 because I never want to be reminded of 2020 ever again. And hindsight should be something else, but 2020 is not, definitely not what hindsight is anymore.
Yeah. What are some of the biggest mistakes that founders have made that you never want to repeat in your own company?
Ooh, bringing on shitty investors. It sucks. I've heard horror stories, a lot of them from women who end up having investors come on and will dethrone them and tell them that they're acting childish and they don't know how to run their business. And we're not far along enough yet where someone else has control over the company, and we will be there at some point. That's what happens when you raise money. But that idea of being in a fight with an investor over something that I feel really deeply about and having them have like power over it and all the work you've done to get to that moment, I think that's heartbreaking. And I think it's really important to make sure that whoever you bring on, the money side of it, like, their soul needs to align with your soul for sure. Yeah, I think those are the most heartbreaking stories I've heard.
And for the summit chapter of your life, I want to know, how do you find a tribe or create your own that really aligns with your values? In a world where everyone is theoretically connected, everyone is accessible, we end up feeling more lonely than ever before. So what pieces of wisdom do you have there for someone who doesn't quite know how they fit into the world?
Yeah. I think the loneliness thing is very much a reaction to the fact that we're only really sharing like the best parts of ourselves on the internet. It's like, oh, wow, Courtney's always traveling. And yeah, sure, but I'm not also showing the fact that I'm working 16 hours a day on stories because it's boring. And I think we see people are like, wow, like her fashion collection's amazing, but we might not know that like she just lost a sibling, which is like all of these real stories, like they're not on social media. And so it can feel alienating because we don't resonate with just the positive aspects of someone's life. Anyway, to build a community of people, I don't know. Then I was like that kid on an airplane. I was really not smart enough to know some things, but I was like, hi, I'm Courtney. Where are you going today? And I would introduce myself to row 22B and then make my way up the plane. And I think there's just something about building a network that requires a lot of curiosity. If you've ever talked to someone who ends up like just telling you about themselves for 45 minutes and then you're like, okay, thanks, that was nice, I gotta go. And they know nothing about you, which ironically, this podcast interview, I haven't asked you any questions, so I feel a bit bad. You know, if you're building a network, it's take the time to ask questions, getting back to that journalism thing, and host dinner parties. I know we can't because it's like a pandemic, but host Zoom drinks. It's just like gather people together and be that instigator. And I always, whenever I'm trying to learn something new, when we could pre-pandemic, I'd be like, cool, I'm going to do a dinner party around like CPG founders, like who are successful at e-com. Like, let's go. And then they'd come because it's New York and you found some cool venue and you put the blood and sweat into organizing it. So I think that's just hosting and being curious.
What are people looking for when you host something? You just mentioned that you bring in, let's say, some top level CPG people together. How do you create something that is alluring to somebody who theoretically has a lot more in terms of social capital than you do?
In my role at Summit, I spent a lot of time thinking about how other people would all interact at a dinner. And so knowing that the people I would invite would get value out of the other people. And I think the common thread here is just like constantly being in service of others and creating that goodwill, which eventually always does come back, but always putting that first step forward for someone else versus then acting in a self-serving way.
So once again, that theme of always thinking about the other keeps coming back. I stumbled across a talk where you said that you had decided to stop doing things for free anymore, which leads me to the question, what is the best and worst part of being a community builder?
Yeah, I don't know where that interview was, but I remember I went through a stage in being at Summit when everyone was cool. Can I just take 45 minutes to pick your brain on how to build a community for my company? And I was just like, no, what part of you thinks that I'm well paid? Like, if you want to pick my brain on something I've spent 15 years learning how to do, then yeah, just pay me like you would a consultant. And I think that being in service of others constantly, the wrong kind of people, the takers, if you will, and Adam, I think it was Adam Grant's book, Give and Take. There's takers out there who are going to just see you as someone who's in service of others and jump on you and be like, hey, can you make me a dinner reservation next week? Like in that city you just went to because you know it better than me. And you're like, that's what a PA is for, dude. And so, yeah, there were boundaries I had to build up. That's definitely probably the only bad thing about being a community builder is like that everyone feels like you're accessible and you're at their service. But there's way more benefits that outweigh that. And I think some of the best benefits are, just feeling really secure. Literally, like there is no worst thing that could ever happen to me. Like AKUA could go out of business. I might not have any money, but there's probably 15 people I could think of right now who would let me live in their spare room until I figured it out and there's tons of food company founders who'd probably send me food to eat. Like there's almost like no risk of me ever being homeless and hungry. And what a very special thing to feel.
That's beautiful. I love that you basically created your own safety net so that you can never fail because you've paid it forward for so many years now that it's almost become a lifelong practice. I think if the world could just live more like that, the world would be a better place. One last question for you then, and that is, if you had a megaphone to the world, what would you invite every single person to do?
I think to seek joy right now. We're getting into the holiday season, and it's really important that we are very kind to ourselves because this has been a freaking rotten year for so many people. And when we seek joy, we're spreading it as well. And I know that's a really cheesy thing to say, but there's so many people that wake up, myself included, probably you, who don't wake up in the morning and think, how am I going to find joy today? Like I woke up in the morning and I was like, I'm going to make coffee and then I'm going to do my email and then I'm going to like work all day and like maybe I'll have time to shower later. And I think if we can create more joy in our lives right now and find periods of happiness, it'll really help things, because we're going into another winter of this pandemic and it's going to be tough. So I want everyone to just be easy on themselves and seek joy.
That's just some sage piece of advice that I really need to take in a little bit more seriously. Also, if people want to follow you and learn more about your products, your crowdfunding, your secret link, how should they find you?
Super easy, because I was really early on Instagram. It's at CBM on Instagram. So just DM me away or whatever.
So lucky. How many people get a 3-letter name on Instagram?
Yeah, it's tough.
Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much.
So there you have it, folks. That was Courtney Boyd Myers. And if you're curious about the product and want to discover more about the brand, you can go to AKUA.co. That's AKUA.co. The Kelp Burger isn't listed there just yet, but as she said, you can message her directly to get the secret link, or you can reach out to @LifeAKUA on Instagram. Similarly, if you're curious about investing in AKUA, you can go to Republic, that's republic.co/AKUA in order to invest. They've raised $209,000 so far with 105 days left to invest and a minimum of $100. This podcast goes live on the week of the 21st, which means that it's basically the holiday season. I hope you guys are taking it easy, enjoying yourself, spending time with friends and family, or just taking care of yourself in this crazy, weird world that we live in today. We're going to be taking a break here for 2 weeks moving forward, just to reset things a little before coming right back at the podcast with more exciting guests in 2021. Ooh, time flies. And with that said, I hope that you stay safe and inspired during this holiday season, because impact is everywhere.